Hey, I'm Lisa Graves, and I'm so glad to be here today with my co-host Nadine Smith. This is the 8.5, your midweek break, and just want to thank Greg Oliar for all the support behind the scenes and LB2. And also, before we dig into our 5 stories, 8 minutes effort to slow things down and refuel and reflect, remember, I want to thank my co-host for so smoothly swapping in when my internet went down last week momentarily without missing a beat. That was an ace pro move, Nadine. Thank you so much for having me back.
It's like words and music. We just, we'd go together just like that, seamless.
Like peanut butter and jelly.
I just assumed I was being hazed, and
no, I would never
just roll with it.
You did great. You did great. How are you doing this week?
Pretty good. It was hard. It was hard for us to like narrow down our topics. It's just been like a cornucopia of things going on. How about you? How are you holding up?
I did a road trip, so I've had a lot of miles under my belt seeing the country. And I have to say that on this particular drive back and forth across half the country, I did not see that many Trump signs, and that was, a joyous thing. I did see some, but it was not the sort of thing I've seen in previous years with the drives, with the forever campaigning of Trump. And so it was sort of, my eyes were pleasantly relieved to just see fabulous countryside and random billboards. So it was a good drive. It was great. It's great.
I love to hear it. Well, I know that you have been chomping at the bit about this very first story that we are going to take on today. In our theme is You Don't Know Jack, and the theme emanates from this first story that we're going to tackle. And I'm going to let you lay it out because it's one of those absurd things that is so revealing about this administration.
Okay, I'm officially setting the timer this time. All right. So I have been thinking a lot about Sean Duffy. I know you may be thinking, why? Why would anyone be thinking a lot about Sean Duffy? But this thing happened this weekend that was crazy. I did talk about it a bit on Midas Touch, but there's more to say. And I can say it here in a slightly different way, which is it was bonkers. What happened was Donald Trump was in Saudi Arabia, and he suddenly started to go off on this riff about Sean Duffy, who is the Secretary of Transportation, and to the Saudis for no apparent reason. I checked; it doesn't look like Sean Duffy was even in the room, so it wasn't like he was saying, "Hey, talk about me over here." But what happened was Trump starts complaining about Pete Buttigieg, who was this previous Secretary of Transportation under Biden and Harris, and who, has, tremendous credentials and did a lot of work to actually try to get more funding for the FAA, especially funding that I sure wish would have been approved by the Republican Congress, as we're seeing these, crises going on across the country, including in Newark. And then, Trump sort of disses Buttigieg, but then goes on to say how great it is that Sean Duffy is a champion lumberjack tree climber. And I have to say, it was one of those needle, sort of on the record moment. You're like, what? And I actually, even though in Wisconsin, I had not realized that Sean Duffy was a lumberjack. I thought he was a former member of Congress, a Fox News personality. But it turns out neither of former congressman or former Fox News personality were apparently the primary qualifications in Trump's mind for Sean Duffy to have this role overseeing our air transportation, our highways, our railroads, the FAA, role of that agency, the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration. Turns out that in Trump's mind, the thing that just is so important for everyone, including the Saudis, to know about Sean Duffy is that he was a champion tree climber, which I know you're wondering, what does that have to do with transportation? Or as my grandma Eileen, whose birthday is today, used to say, what does that have to do with the price of tea in China? And the answer is nothing. It has nothing to do with any qualification to be the Secretary of Transportation or the Secretary of anything, or even the Secretary of anything other than, I suppose, the Lumberjack Festival, which, by the way, it turns out Sean Duffy was his job after college for about 6 years before law school was to help run the Lumberjack Festival. He wasn't the secretary of the Lumberjack Festival, but he was running the Lumberjack Festival. And it turns out from the age of like 5 or 7, he had been competing in, the log rolling thing where you try to knock someone else off the log. Again,
I'm addicted to those little shorts. If they come on, I will watch them, just like I used to watch the horseshoeing, as though that had anything to do with my life. So I'm very familiar with this sport.
It is that, it's the physical comedy of the falling in the water thing. But again, nothing to do with the Department of Transportation. But it turns out that he was like a teenage sort of champion of climbing a tree really fast. And as far as I can tell, and I did research this, the last time that he maybe competed versus maybe he was just a co-host was like in 2002 or 2003. So he's not even a recent lumberjack tree climbing champion. He was actually a commentator before the Fox News gig. He was a commentator on lumberjack competitions. Now in Wisconsin, in Hayward, Wisconsin, like that's a big deal. And I'm not saying it's not a big deal. It's great for lumberjacks and it's great for there to be this sport and people compete in it. It just has nothing to do with your qualifications to run the Department of Transportation. And I just think it's so absurd and insane that in Trump's sort of addled mind, this manly act, or maybe teenage act. I actually, for a moment, I thought, do I care whether Sean Duffy was a teenage lumberjack or like a teenage werewolf or, whatever. Like, I don't really care. Of course, that brought me to Monty Python. I'm a lumberjack and I don't care, or I'm okay. Actually, he's a lumberjack and he's okay. That was crazy. So then as I looked more into Sean Duffy's background, I discovered that he was being paid a princely sum as a Fox News host. Now, he had a part-time gig there until he became the Secretary of Transportation, which I'm sure is part of the audition for Trump, that you're a Fox News personality is also a qualification, apparently, not in the real world of actual qualifications, meaning merit selection versus DEI in their world, this sort of affirmative action for Fox hosts. Or unnecessary hiring of Fox News hosts. But it turned out that last year, for this part-time gig at Fox, he was paid over $500,000 a year as a part-time Fox host, which sort of makes you wonder, like, how much these other people are being paid to say all sorts of things, because that was a pretty big sum, and that was in addition to his consulting firm where he got about $700,000, and then another consulting gig where another $300,000. So he was pulling down like more than $1 million, including $500,000 from Fox. But that's not all I want to say about this. And then I will turn it back over to you, Nadine, which is among the other reasons why this job is actually important, as we began, the safety of our airlines, the safety of our railroads, our highways, oversight over the vehicle plans of Elon Musk, whose vehicles have been investigated because of fires and other hazards, as well as this idea to have driverless vehicles, et cetera. Musk also tried to parlay his oversight of the government, an unelected role, into trying to get contracts, or at least the statements back in February were that a Musk company should be taking over key functions within the Department of Transportation, including the FAA, including maybe Starlink or SpaceX or some other company we don't even know about. But the other thing that I learned was Sean Duffy was a reality TV star right before law school. He went to William Mitchell, but when he was a reality TV star on Boston Road Rules for MTV, that's sort of how he made his fame, I guess, other than the teenage lumberjack thing. And he met on another show, he met his wife, Rachel Campos, who's also on Fox, and they have like 8 or 9 children. And in February, after Sean Duffy was confirmed to be the Secretary of Transportation, he issued an order, or sort of a command within the Department of Transportation, that he wants future highway dollars to be allocated based on birth rate. So not based on the actual population of the state, the number of people on the highways, the number of commerce, trucks in commerce, not how congested our highways are, not things based on things that are real. He, as a father of, a lot of children, wants U.S. highway dollars to be allocated based on how many kids a family has, which most of those kids aren't driving. Hey, I don't know if he knows that, but I hope none of his kids are
Those
driving.
lumberjack kids, they get going early. They start driving early,
climbing trees early. But like, he wants to make our policy on transportation based on birth rate. And of course, that translates that's code for white birth rate, because they're not actually, the Trumpsters aren't actually encouraging other people of other races to have children. But this idea that we would have a totally irrational, ridiculous policy in the United States, that our highway dollars are based on how many kids people have, is just shocking and reckless and ridiculous. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I present to you, people of the earth, Sean Duffy, lumberjack, and I'm not okay. So that's the situation.
Shocking and ridiculous is pretty much, you can just have that on cut and paste when talking about this administration. There's another piece of this that I just want to highlight for folks really quickly. The emphasis on him being a lumberjack as his primary qualification was really by way of contrasting him with Pete Buttigieg, which he described as a guy who rode a bicycle to work. Like this was the most effeminate trait he could imagine. And to contrast him with the manliness of Sean Duffy climbing trees. Honestly, right now, being able to climb a tree and look up and see what the planes are doing may be a qualification, considering how he's been running this department. And, we didn't have planes colliding with helicopters under Buttigieg. We did not have Newark radar going dead. We didn't have Mexican ships crashing into bridges. We didn't have a lot of the stuff that we are seeing now. But the only thing that Trump could come up with to try to, go after his predecessor, who, is competent, who improved safety, was to say real men don't ride bikes. And which tells us a couple of things: that the MAGA world is really rattled by Pete Buttigieg's growing profile. I mean, this is a guy that goes right into the lion's den, goes right onto the manosphere websites or podcasts, and goes on to Fox News and, takes them to school. So I think just as much as it was a bizarre way of trying to squeeze right past the fact that you put somebody in charge who is failing in that department, it's probably a good sign that they're that scared of Pete Buttigieg that Trump was preoccupied with him while he was shaking the Middle East down for bribes.
Yeah, it really is astonishing. And I know, like, I fear that it's like a distraction to get into it, but I just felt like it was just so astonishing. And that's not to say that that Duffy is responsible for every disaster that comes our way.
I'll say it. Duffy's responsible for every disaster that comes our way. But go ahead, proceed.
But when you look at this attack on hiring, and we'll get into this a little bit later in the show, but you look at this attack on hiring, on diversity, equity, and inclusion, on really merit, making sure that people don't get the job just because they're like a white lumberjack. Like, it really is an astonishing circumstance that we find ourselves in when you have someone who, I looked at his congressional record, like, was he involved in any transportation? And it looks like there was one bridge, I think, between Wisconsin and Minnesota that he worked on during his 8 years in Congress. But that's not actually a qualification for running this agency, this enormous agency that has an enormous responsibility for our safety. We do not have the best and brightest in these cabinet positions. Like, we know that. And I'm not saying that he's a lawyer. He was a district attorney in a small county that has very, very, very little crime. Pretty easy job as a congressman. He's done nothing, I think, to distinguish himself as someone who has really thought about infrastructure, in a deep way, the challenges of the 21st century. But you know what? He was a teenage lumberjack. So
who knows how to get a lady pregnant. So yes, boom, that's all he needs. That's
Yeah,
all
you
he
know,
needs.
because we have a president who
Yeah.
wants to be known as the great fertilizer. So, yeah, it all
Yes.
somehow it
Well,
all fits
yeah.
together. Yeah,
And it's kind of like this cartoonish idea of masculinity. You know, he's a
yeah,
lumberjack with 9 kids. That guy
yeah,
rides a bike to work and
yeah,
stops planes from falling out of the sky.
yeah,
Anyway,
yeah.
well, so
Okay,
there we have it. There we
so
have
there
it.
we have it. Now on these things that Trump says, I think are in some ways like he has this secret special skill, which is to find the most incompetent or corrupt people in a room and like give them jobs or ambassadorships to like, you know, France and things like that. But he also, it turns out, he has another secret superpower that we're now starting to see. And like Brexit. Maybe Trump is part of, you know, the tale of woe that helps make unbrexiting a thing. So what do you want
Yeah.
to say about that, Nadine?
Well, you know, we are beginning to see in this reordering of the world, uh, you know, other countries that we used to think of as our closest allies in trade and in NATO, basically remaking the world without counting on America. You know, the World Health Organization was talking about how to prepare for the next pandemic on the same day that the FDA announced that they are going to basically take COVID vaccines off the shelves because you can only have them if you're 65 or older or have severe health issues. We don't want people to have access. So, you know, the anti-science-ness of taking fluoride out of the water and now stripping away vaccines has left the rest of the world going, well, we can't count on the US. We're going to have to build new trade partners. We're going to have to build new security, you know, and healthcare arrangements. And so one of the ways, one of I think the unintended consequences, and we'll talk about one of them, which is he's so unpopular, he's losing elections in other countries, right? To be associated with Trump is beginning to be a real liability. But, you know, the same people who were behind Brexit, you know, the Nigel Farage's, that same infrastructure
Yeah.
was, you know, was part of Trump's ticket. Nigel Farage was there to help him be a silverback gorilla. That was their code for try to increase his swagger when he debated Hillary Clinton.
Yep.
But right now, what we are seeing is that the UK is going, wow, we made a huge mistake with Brexit, and they are beginning to chip away, and they're looking to rebuild some of those severed ties post Brexit, and they're not waiting for the U.S. So they're moving forward. They just passed provisions for more youth visas, more trade deals, more climate cooperation, and pretty much the unspoken message is we're tired of waiting for U.S. leadership that's too busy with culture wars and internal chaos. So whether it's vaccine supply chains, climate grids, pandemic response, Europe is redesigning without us, without American leadership, which is now seen as optional and, in fact, perhaps even an impediment to progress. So, you know, from this message of America first has become America alone.
Yeah. Yeah. It really is. It really is extraordinary. Now, I was looking at some foreign coverage a couple of weeks ago, and I think it was one of the leaders of France who said, you know, they just can't have their future depend on the votes of 10,000 people in Wisconsin, who some of the same people who elected, you know, Sean Duffy to Congress a while back in place of David Ovey when David Ovey retired. But, you know, Europe is, I coming to the realization, as you point out, Nadine, including the UK, which tries to distinguish itself from the mainland of Europe, but you know, that our allies, longtime allies across the Atlantic Ocean, cannot count on American policy to be consistent when it can end up with this result with someone like Trump, who's a destructive force
Yeah.
on our allies, a destructive force from a national security standpoint, a destructive force on trade, and the trade thing also I think has to be helping to drive the United Kingdom and Europe into each other's arms again, to be facing these ridiculous, nonsensical, seemingly AI generated trade, you know, trade tariffs, and then have Trump saying things like the other countries pay the taxes. It's not us. Like just the lie, just the constant lying, which we know about from before, but it seems like to be on a bigger, bolder scale. And then UK sort of cut a new deal with Trump that then seems like it enraged, US manufacturers, because it was actually a pretty good deal, because it turns out Trump really isn't a good negotiator. It isn't the art of the deal.
The art of the deal is such a fraud. I mean, everything that has happened has been this: a lot of bluster about tariffs, a lot of chest pounding, and then capitulation, complete folding. They've just called his bluff over and over and over again. But the trust that's been severed doesn't come back when the tariff gets suspended or delayed or canceled. And yeah, the world is being remade around the U.S. as a dangerous and reckless wild card, and maybe in the end that's a good thing to see. X not always marking the spot for the U.S. And maybe it will send a message to these isolationists, these America First folks, that it is an interconnected world. Viruses don't stop at borders. Storms don't stop at borders, and we will reap what we sow if we turn our back on allies right now, and we're beginning to see that happen.
Yeah, and I want to thank you for mentioning Nigel Farage. Not that I'm a fan, anti-fan, but I think we've been in this period now for the last really 15 years, where the social media sort of systems that people thought for a moment were really going to draw us together have been weaponized in ways that have really allowed the fueling of propaganda and disinformation. And that Brexit campaign, I think, was built on the same sort of white nationalist, racist components here as there. There in
absolutely
UK, anti-immigrant sentiments, but also it was fueled by disinformation campaigns by sort of right-wing forces trying to
Cambridge Analytica, the same forces that we saw driving Trump won. It really is a wake-up call. When Brexit passed, I was telling everybody this is their playbook. That seemed impossible at one point, and in the same way people in 2015, 2016 were thinking Trump's too much of a clown, but they were using this exact same playbook. So, but yes, I mean, the good news is he may be driving the UK back into Brexit, creating greater solidarity, and creating a world where one maniac occupying the White House cannot disrupt the entire, globe.
Yeah, it really is amazing, and I think that for me, as an American, this idea of the United Kingdom, it is actually an island, although it's a colonizer.
There we go. And you know what?
Island.
The timing is perfect.
Yes. But to see that the unraveling of Brexit, the unraveling of this disinformation campaign of Nigel Farage and the allies of Trump, really was a thing. But now the alarm has gone off. We are ready for our third segment, which we're going to feature the amazing work of Chioma Chukwu and her team over at American Oversight. Chioma is one of my heroes. She is an expert in helping hold the powerful accountable. She leads American Oversight, which is, I think, really one of the leading organizations in the country that is working on transparency. And they have a new lawsuit that we're going to talk about. And Chioma, before she joined the American Oversight operation, she also worked on the House Oversight Committee. She worked for the great, amazing Elijah Cummings, and with other members there, and has just a fantastic career and is such an amazing, wonderful person. So welcome to our show, Chioma. We're just so honored to have you join us, and just wanted to say thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so we want
to duper busy right now. You've got a lot. You got a lot cooking right this week.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, so tell us about it. Tell us about your the new lawsuit, Chioma.
Well, we as many Americans have just been horrified to see what the Trump administration has been doing by going after universities, law firms, et cetera. So when we were observing the back and forth between the administration and Harvard's very brave refusal to capitulate to the administration's demands to essentially dismantle their DEI programming, and then thereafter, the administration threatened to revoke their tax exemption as a nonprofit, as well as cut federal funding, critical funding that's used for research and other, life-saving medical research and things of that nature. We knew that we had to get to the bottom of the extent to which the administration was politically interfering with the university, with Harvard, to essentially push back on institutions that are refusing to advance this unlawful agenda. And so we filed suit on Monday because the administration refused to produce records that we had filed under the Freedom of Information Act, which is a federal law that essentially says that governments belong to the people. And when those governments are requested in people's name, particularly when they're a public interest, they have to be produced. And when we sent those to the IRS, to the Department of Education, they refused to turn them over. And so we ended up filing suit this Monday to demand that information, to release it to the public. Because again, those records belong to the American people, and people deserve to know how the administration is weaponizing the levers of government to punish those with whom it disagrees.
Well, I'll say this because you probably can't say this, but thank you for suing the bastards. So thank you. Or as I call them, the Trumps, because I've been trying to get this thing to stick where it's like not son of a, or a bastard, but a Trump or a son of a Trump. Anyway, but back to the seriousness of this, because this weaponization is a real assault on the pillars of civil society, and targeting one of the first universities on this soil, a university that, does have a history over the bulk of its history of basically only admitting white men, but ultimately, changed its admission policies and was targeted by the right wing for its admissions policies in a ruling by the Supreme Court that was issued by the Roberts Court just this past year to really assail the admissions process for ensuring a diverse admissions, diverse classes at the university. That ruling has had all these reverberations and emboldened this anti-DEI assault, both in the nonprofit world and in the sort of for-profit world. And then we have this administration that has come in and been on the attack. And so can you tell us a little bit more about the type of weaponization that you're seeing, that you're helping to counter, and also what people, how people can help join that effort in countering this?
Sure. They're great questions, Lisa. What we are seeing is the administration using its bully pulpit to go after entities, institutions that refuse to comply with its unlawful demands. There are those that choose to capitulate, and there are those that choose to stand up for the rule of law. Harvard happens to be one of those institutions. And the reason why we thought it was critical to file suit here is because that's just the beginning. Going after Harvard is a warning sign for the rest of civil society that they're going to come after us next if we do not stand up and push back against the administration's unlawful efforts to force us to adhere to these unlawful policies. And it could be another institution tomorrow. It could be foundations the next week. It could be any nonprofits and organizations that are designed to serve the public good. Our goal at American Oversight is to increase transparency and advance democracy. There are other organizations that are serving marginalized populations, serving women who are just seeking access to reproductive care, that are helping to lower the price of insulin for their elderly grandparents. These are things that are not self-interested, but are designed to advance democracy. And the administration cares not. What they want and what they are trying to do here is to ensure that every entity entity that does not share its values, that does not espouse the same ideologies, capitulates to its demands. And if they don't agree, then they will use the levers of the federal government to go after them. And we saw that happen with Harvard. Most recently, we know that there was a False Claims Act investigation that was launched against Harvard. And for those unfamiliar, the False Claims Act is a federal law that is typically used to go after financial fraudsters for defrauding the government. And the theory here is that Harvard, because it refuses to agree to the unlawful demands of the Trump administration by cutting off its DEI programming in the way that the administration wants and desires, that they are defrauding the government because they are saying that they're complying with anti-discrimination federal laws, and in fact they are not. That is not what the False Claims Act is supposed to accomplish. And so this is just more evidence of this administration weaponizing laws that are designed to rid the federal government and the private sector of bad actors, of fraud, of waste and abuse. And they're using it to turn diversity, equity, inclusion principles on its head.
Chioma, I'm so glad that you are putting this in the context of them dismantling every institution, not just education. We've seen them threatening nonprofits already, and we've seen them go after law firms, basically shaking them down for pro bono work, demanding that they abandon diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we've seen law firms capitulate, but we're also seeing this other thing now, not only Harvard, but I think there's an alliance that's being formed of universities, several hundred of them, basically saying, you go, we go. And can you talk about how the resistance is sort of showing up? I know with law firms, there are the law firms that have bent the knee are losing clients. They're losing top talent. How are universities and these institutions having each other's back?
Yes. So what we're seeing is that universities are starting to come together to mount a common defense to say all for one and one for all, because they recognize the value in not being essentially bullied as individuals. The collective voice, the we, is always stronger than the individual. There is power in that unity. And that is exactly why American Oversight chose to file its lawsuit, because we recognize we are not going to stand idly by while the administration starts to pick off different nonprofit organizations, different foundations. We are going to speak with a collective voice with other members of civil society who have already made very clear that they will not stand for this, that we will have each other's backs, and we will ensure that the administration knows that it is not above the rule of law. And so it's so important that institutions, academic institutions, and again, nonprofit organizations stand together at a time like this and resist.
I love it. An academic NATO, the Big Ten Academic Alliance, formalizing a mutual defense compact. It's beautiful.
Yeah. So I know that you probably have to go pretty soon because you've been so busy, but this week is particularly hectic. And so we're super grateful for you to take the time to come on this evening to talk to us and our listeners. Are there things you could share, Chioma, with folks about what they can do, how they could help? How to stand with you, not give in, and stand up to this weaponization against these pillars of our civil society?
Absolutely. It's so important for folks to remain engaged. It's very easy to feel overwhelmed by the torrent of information that is coming out of this administration every single day. But if people stay engaged, it will help to not normalize what's happening, right? What the administration is trying to do is normalize this authoritarian behavior. And so it's important that people have conversations. They amplify what's happening when there are victories, when there are the wins, when folks are standing up to the rule of law, that they're sharing that, they're talking to their communities, they're talking to their family members, they're spreading the word so people know this is not all for naught. They're not all entities that are resigned to the fact that the administration will prevail. There are people who believe in democracy and who are going to continue to fight to make sure that we live in a better world than that from which we came. And so it's important that people remain engaged, amplify what they're hearing, the work of American Oversight, the work of many of our dear partners like Democracy Forward, Protect Democracy, Brennan, Crew. There's so many civil society organizations that are doing incredibly important work to ensure that DEI is not unlawfully dismantled in the way that the administration hopes. And we encourage folks to, follow independent media, those that are not beholden to the administration, that are not negotiating the terms of good independent journalism, that will allow that truth and facts to remain truth and facts, because that's the only way for us to get through this, is to make sure that we are dealing in reality. And so that's what I would leave your listeners with, because there's so much we can do, and folks should not give up, because there's so many reasons for us to continue to be hopeful. And American Oversight is going to continue to fight for and on behalf of the American people.
Oh, thank you so much, Chioma. Thanks for coming on, and we would love to have you back anytime. And just please thank you and your whole team there for all their efforts to try to find out what documents exist and get those documents into the public domain where they belong. Thank you for your courage and your brilliance and kindness. It's a joy to know you, Chioma. And thanks for joining Nadine and I tonight on the 5, 8 and a half.
Thank you so much.
Give them hell.
All right.
Whew,
well, now that was a breath of sunshine in a way, and an effort.
I know it could have been our glass half full for tonight. I was posting the famous Edmund Burke quote: "When bad men combine, the good must associate, else they will fall one by one." It always fires me up when people, understand that solidarity is the only way through all of this. So.
Yep. Well, so I was going to make not quite a pun, but just a transition on sunlight and sunshine over to our next topic. Which is about the weather, but about so much more than the weather. And I know you have some things you wanna say about the forecast for cluelessness going on.
It's it is hard to know where to begin, but as everyone knows, these severe storms have devastated the South. And we are seeing an increase in the intensity and the frequency of these really severe storms. But thanks to Trump and Doge and Musk, the ability to track weather has been really gutted. The funding for the infrastructure for tracking weather is being, their budget has been slashed. Satellites are offline. Weather balloon launches are down. We're basically flying blind into the most active storm season on record. Just as climate change is supercharging tornadoes and hurricanes. I read this horrible headline that in one of these tornadoes, a couple clinging to each other, each lost an arm, right? The opposite arm in this tornado. I mean, at a moment when we need this more than ever, they have not only gutted our ability to track and prepare, but they've also gutted the response to these tragedies. So FEMA's workforce has been decimated. Call centers are overwhelmed, and disaster aid is a pipe dream. In Kentucky and beyond, there are desperate communities who are left to fend for themselves. And, you have Republican senators who demonized FEMA, who had people, when Biden was president, fearful of accepting help from FEMA because they were spreading all kinds of lies, that if you accepted FEMA's help, the government would take your land. You had people posting that their family members who were cut off, from civilization, starving, begging them to send food, but they wouldn't accept the help that was available to them because they believed these lies. And but the hypocrisy and the sabotage. So you have people like Josh Hawley, begging for FEMA help. But take a look at his voting record when it came to FEMA. The governor of Florida, when he was in Congress, no mercy, no sense of decency when it came to other, New York after Hurricane Sandy, no funding. The moment his state gets hit and it's bad for him politically, hat in hand with his white go-go boots on, out there stomping around for FEMA dollars. And so, but it is a culture of selfishness. It is a culture that says nothing matters to me unless it affects me personally. Empathy is weakness. Empathy is the equivalent of riding your bike to work. All of these things. They've gutted these agencies that keep us safe and then act like they have, surprise when disaster strikes. And it's not just bad policy. People are dead because of this. More people will die because of this. And we've got to make sure that the responsibility is not treated as though it's, this is an act of God. We can do things to change the factors that are creating these supercharged storms that are ever increasing. We can do things to make sure that people are prepared as best they can be when these storms are coming. And we can damn sure make sure that we show up to help our neighbors, whether they're in the next house, the next town, or the next state, weather these terrible events and survive them and get on the other side of them. But right now they have blood on their hands because of these cuts that they made and the reckless disregard for human life that is behind this selfish ideology of sending Elon Musk and his band of incels to slash everything through the offices of Doge without any concern for what's happening. And the chickens have come home to roost, and it is a fatal mistake, and everyone should be treating it that way.
I could not agree with you more, Nadine. And this idea that it's every man for himself in America, or every person for themselves in America, that we don't have a functioning, effective, robust, assertive FEMA to help us when we face disasters, that people just have to just survive if they can. And the president may or may not declare an emergency depending on whether he likes you, likes your congressperson, likes your governor. That is not the American way, at least for modern America. That's not the way that our democracy, our economy, our world should be running. And as you pointed out, the propaganda from the right is so grotesque that it led people in North Carolina, after that hurricane went inland, like the farthest sort of inland we've really ever seen, and swamped the mountains near Ashland. There were people in those communities who were armed and asking if people who were coming in to help them, were they FEMA or not? Or could they say that they were, Red Cross or just a volunteer, so that they would not be accosted by people who have had their views so pickled in right-wing propaganda that they could not actually see help for the genuine help that it is. And then you have Trump putting the most incompetent, malevolent people in charge of these agencies. The idea that Christine Noem, the Department of Homeland Security, should have oversight over FEMA, when, quite frankly, and I will say this to my last breath, whenever that is, but anyone who murders a puppy is a sociopath. Anyone who murders a puppy because they didn't hunt good enough and not give that puppy to a shelter or a kid is a sociopath. We have someone who is a sociopath at the helm of the Department of Homeland Security, someone who would go down for a photo op in a hellhole in El Salvador, and to take photos in front of men who are incarcerated in cells with 150 guys and 2 toilets and 2 sinks and like all the glamour and her, 5-figure watch or whatever. And she's in charge of the agency as oversight over FEMA. And Trump has been saying, he doesn't even think maybe we need FEMA. States should pay for it. People should just, figure out alternatives, when America is still one of the richest countries in the world. And we have sufficient funding to support emergency aid, and we need it because this, hurricane season, fire season, et cetera, tornado season is a direct result of the climate changes that are underway, that are coming home to roost, that are also attributed to the policies of the billionaires who have swept Trump into office with, their extraction plans for our national parks and more. And so, the storms are going to get worse. And that's what all the leading trustworthy scientists say, is that we're going to have intensified greater storms because of the climate change that Trump is determined to not mitigate, and that the Republican Party has been determined to stop efforts to mitigate it. And then on top of it, to literally add insult to injury, to basically blind the National Weather Service in key places, to cut funding for people to be on deck at night, because in Trump's fantasy land, I presume they think that, storms go off at 5, the clock out at 5. No storms can happen overnight. We know, in fact, many tornadoes happen overnight, that's when they're most deadly because people are sleeping and don't realize their storms are coming if the Weather Service isn't there to alert them. And then you have on top of that this effort to basically politicize FEMA and limit what it can do for we the American people, at the same time that this man is planning a parade a military parade in his honor that's going to cost millions of dollars, but they're not spending money on people in Kentucky, Missouri, and other places who are suffering from losing their homes, their family members, pets, jobs because of these disasters. It's really outrageous. And I'm just so glad you teed this up for flagging it tonight, Nadine. It's horrifying.
Yeah. Well, I will say this: sociopath is just above lumberjack in terms of credentials for appointment in the Trump administration. And we should be clear that for him, the art of the deal for him is, how can I shake you down? What leverage do I have? So for him, FEMA simply is a tool, in the same way. Hey, you know what? You want this funding? Harvard, you want this research funding? Cut your diversity, equity, inclusion. Go back to the old days when the only qualification was, I'm a rich white guy, and grandpappy went there. All of that, right? And instead of diversity, they want uniformity. Instead of equity, they want disequity. Instead of inclusion, they want exclusion. And they're very clear. And for them, this is a bargaining chip now. Your people are suffering. You're taking a hit at the polls because you're not delivering. What's in it for me? I'm going to make you, capitulate on this policy. I'm going to make you, dance the way I want you to dance. All of this, Trump only looks at things through the lens of, can I use this as leverage to make you vulnerable and shake you down for what I want?
Yeah. I mean, just this idea that he and so many of his fans have embraced this just greed and anger and stupidity as policy. It really is awful. But there are some signs of hope in terms of some of the polling that he has lost some support, and I think he's going to lose some more support. And yet, switching to our next topic, he seems to think that the way forward is through more currying of the vote from white supremacists and white Afrikaners. And so we were going to talk about a couple other topics today, but I was again astonished to see what was going on in the White House with, Trump meeting with the president of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa.
Do we have that clip? Because we should drop it in the chat if we have that clip, because it is beautiful. And especially if you watch the Zelensky, White Oval Office visit and just cringed and JD Vance, this guy clearly, the president clearly saw that and came prepared.
Yeah. I mean, the idea that he would insult the president of South Africa, basically lie to his face and the American people and the world by claiming that there's an anti-white genocide happening in South Africa when that's not true. Then to have this little video play of crosses, which were actually like symbolic, not actual, deaths of white farmers. And in fact, the South African policy right now that is being disputed in essence, although not so much in South Africa, but here is one in which South Africa passed a policy of sort of reparations, land reparations, where land had been taken from South Africans, from Black South Africans, given to white farmers during the grotesque, oppressive, authoritarian regime of racial apartheid in South Africa. And in South Africa now, there is a program where if that land is laying fallow, is unused, that land could then be returned to the family or to African South Africans to have that land, some of the land that was taken from them. There's no case of genocide happening in South Africa against white South African farmers. They look quite healthy, actually, when you look at the photos of them coming in at Dulles at the airport to be greeted as heroes with all their fabulous luggage with them. Not the typical genocidal circumstance that we see in actual actual documentation by reporters of that. And I noticed that the person who greeted them, they sent out the Deputy Secretary of State, Chris Landau, to greet them, to welcome them to America, these South African farmers. I remember Chris Landau because I actually debated him when we were when I was just in law school at Kirkland & Ellis. We were both working there one summer. And what I remember about Chris Landau was during our moot court at Kirkland, Chris actually tried to inject Jesus into the conversation about this mock trial, which required me to stand up and say objection. And the mock judge said, "What's your basis?" And I said, "Jesus is irrelevant to this trial." And then the Kirkland & Ellis partner winced as he sustained me that, in fact, he was irrelevant to this trial. Chris Landau was a very smart guy who was very, far right, even back then. He's been rewarded with these other jobs. He was like Trump's ambassador to Mexico the last time around. Now he's being trotted out to go to Dulles to welcome these supposed survivors of the non-genocide in South Africa. Meanwhile, in this same time horizon, this same time frame, we have the Trump administration violating a court order by a federal district court judge to not remove people from the United States, immigrants who have a deportation order but cannot be returned to their home country, apparently. And the Trump team sent them overnight over the weekend or to Sudan, which actually has been facing real genocidal circumstances, a real ongoing civil war. It's a South Sudan
real famine. Yeah.
Real famine. Yeah. And they ostensibly want to dump these individuals who are in US custody into a civil war scenario rather than give them notice, due process, so that they could have a hearing about whether they have ties to other countries that they could be returned to, about whether they would face persecution or death if they were just dropped off in the middle of like a war zone. And so you have these things juxtaposed. You have this disregard for actual refugees and immigrants. You have this ripping away of the temporary protected status for Venezuelans who came here to the United States seeking refuge in our country. You have Trump, suggesting that he might take away other temporary protected status for immigrants who fled war zones or who have, sought freedom in the United States, who've done nothing wrong. And
sending
yet
Afghan translators back to almost certain death.
Yes. Oh. Yeah. But there they are welcoming the Afrikaner farmers as heroes. And Trump had the audacity to use the White House to soil the White House, this gilded, sort of trumped up stage that he's created to insult the president of South Africa and assert a falsehood that there's a genocide in South Africa that is not happening, is not real, is a function of the rabid fever dream imagination of these right-wing white supremacists who have surrounded Trump and who he is following and doing their bidding. So it's again another shocking and outrageous thing.
What I loved in this moment, though, because Trump is asserting that this thing is happening that's not happening, while ignoring actual places where genocide, famine, and all these horrible things are occurring, sending people who've come to the United States legally here, like the gay hairdresser who's in CCOT, who, they won't even answer his mother's request to find out whether he's still alive. All of these things. But the president of South Africa, Trump kept bringing this up. He kept debunking it. Other people in the room were saying this isn't happening. And then the South African president basically said, I'm sorry, I don't have a plane to give you. Right. Just like, I understand what this is. Like, I know a shakedown when I see it, but to say it to his face was just wonderful.
I have to give a toast to that, even though we're not
there we go.
quite at that full, but like seriously.
My glass is literally half full. So I'm going
to the president of South Africa standing up to Trump in the White House.
He said what Carney's eyes conveyed. Remember when Carney's in the White House and Trump is saying these wild things, and you can see Carney kind of going, "Oh my God." But so more standing up to them, more pushing back. There is this duality because we have to take them literally, but also not believe, there's the danger of treating them like they've got Project 2025, this well-oiled machine. They're executing it, like a heist team. No, they're smash and grab artists. They are incompetent. They're focused. They have their singular mission is get money and do it by dividing people. Trump does not have to be led into racism by his advisors. He's already
You're
there.
right. Yep.
But I think that it is important that we mock the incompetence and that we not allow ourselves to be fearful and intimidated by them, and that we not be so cruel to followers who drank the Kool-Aid, who found themselves cordoned off in their algorithmic, information prisons, because some of them are beginning to go, wait a second, I was told this, I believed. There's some new research that shows that young people, especially young men, are sort of breaking right, young women are breaking left. But a big part of it is this belief that the system is rigged. So there's some new polling I heard about yesterday that said young people admire Bernie, AOC, and Trump, and for the same reason. They see them as truth tellers about a rigged system. They see them as disruptors of a broken system. And to the degree that Trump cultivated that, he got some buy-in. But now that the system is broken, people are going, hey, you know what? We kind of needed that system. We needed to fix it. It wasn't perfect, but this is garbage. So, but yeah, so I think, so to me, to sit in the Oval Office and to tell the president to his face, I'm sorry I didn't bring you a big bribe, is exactly the kind of energy we got to keep. So
yes.
Whew. All right. Well,
I can't believe it's been an hour. It's been
I know
amazing.
It has been, and here we are at the part of the night that when we began this, we said we're going to be talking about a lot of heavy stuff, but before we go, we always want to end with a segment that we call the glass half full. And it's not to ignore what's broken, but to remind ourselves of what's still beautiful, still bold, still possible. Sometimes it's a story, sometimes it's a moment, or a movement that fills the cup even just a little. And this time around, we're calling it the global Trump recoil. Around the world, voters are rejecting the Trump-friendly candidates, the authoritarian politics. We've seen it we saw it most recently in Canada, where not only did Carney prevail over extraordinary odds, he was considered, what's less than a dark horse, and not only did he prevail, but the Trump-esque candidate was swept entirely out of office. We are seeing around the world countries taking a good hard look at America and saying to the candidate that most parrots Trump, we don't want that here. And so the most recent country to add to that list is Romania, where they chose more progressive candidates over the MAGA copycats. And again, Trump is so unpopular. The MAGA brand just doesn't travel well. He's so unpopular, he's losing elections for other people in other countries. And not only does the MAGA brand not travel well, but even at home, cracks are showing. A terrible, his ratings are plummeting. And speaking of South Africans, Elon Musk is now tweeting that he's pulling back from politics. He's going to refocus his attention, for the next 5 years on Tesla, as it burns like a Tesla battery in the rain. So, and I think that is a sign that, I think Tesla's stock has plummeted. The confidence has plummeted. They no longer make the fastest selling brand of truck here in America. All of these things. And so the hopeful note is this: democracy isn't dead. Around the globe, people are standing up for progress. They're rejecting these calls to end action on climate. And so to the good people of Romania who said no to Trump light, a toast.
All right.
You know, I'm gonna have to one of these shows. I'm actually gonna have hard liquor in that glass. But that is a wrap. I am Nadine Smith alongside Lisa Graves. Thanks for making space for the 5, 8 and a half, your midweek breather. Take care of yourself, take care of each other, and tune in on Friday for Greg Oliar and LB on the 5, 8, and we will be back right here next week. Take care.